Good afternoon, class. This week we are embarking upon a visit to modernist American poetry. That is a time in American literature really from around slightly before 1900 until the end of the Second World War, around 1945, is called the modernist period. We're reading four very important modernist poets this week. Robert Frost, Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams, and Ezra Pound. They are huge names in America, the American canon, if you will, in American poetry. I'll commend to you to look up any of them online. You can find out a lot of interesting stories about them and interesting things about their lives. But what I want you to focus on this week is the nature of the poetry that they are writing. I will suggest to you that the modernists, there was a great degree of intellectualism, if you will, in modernist poetry. Present in these poems is a sense of what I call universality, and that is that there is a universal experience that can be taken from each of these poems. It is not a highly confessional poem. We will be reading some confessional poets later in the semester. It is not a highly personal poem in the sense of personal experience oftentimes, but it is something that is more akin to a philosophical observation, if you will. There's a degree of intellectualism here. There is that universal experience that can be taken away, if you will, from these poems. I'll ask you in the discussion forum this week to reflect on what I call the meditative quality of these works. And you'll see that in the discussion forum. In this week's discussion forum, I'm only asking that you write a short piece. You, again, this week do not have to respond to your classmates because I want you to really sit and think about what these poems may mean to you and how you interpret these poems. For example, let's look at William Carlos Williams's very short poem. It's on page 511 of your Gardner anthology, The Red Wheelbarrow. William Carlos Williams was a doctor. He was a physician. Of course, he's much more known for his poetry than his medical practice. But this is one of his most famous poems. It's incredibly short. So listen as I read it. The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. That's the end of the poem. What does this mean? There are many stories about how this poem may have come to be written. We don't necessarily know if those are true or not. And you can look those up. But what I will suggest to you is there is an importance to the structure of this poem. There is something called enjambment. In this case, you've got a single word on a line. It causes you to pause. In fact, the three words on the first line of each stanza run into the second line. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rain water, beside the white chickens. The structure of this poem is important because if the poem were written in another way, you as the reader would not pause at the end of each line. It is as if this first line leaves you slightly hanging, and then you go to the second line for one more word to complete what you think will be a thought, but it's not necessarily a complete thought. And that's why I call this a meditative type poem. It forces you to think about not only the meaning of this moment, what does the red wheelbarrow mean? What do the white chickens mean? What does the rainwater mean? It's very philosophical in that sense. So think about these poems as you read this week. Think about what they mean to you. Think about their meditative or philosophical quality, their universality, if you will. Everybody that reads this poem may have a slightly different takeaway. And I think that's the important thing that I want you to come out of this week's study of modern American poetry, if you will, these four classic modernists of that period. Understand that what you take away from that may be slightly different than what your classmates take away from it. And that's the beauty of poetry, and that's perfectly okay. So I want you to reflect, if you will, in the piece that I put for you on the discussion board this week, what your thoughts are on this meditative quality. So think about that. There are no other readings this week other than what's in the anthology. On the syllabus, I had listed that I would possibly put some PDFs up of additional poems, but I think these poems that we have in the anthology reflect very well the modernist sentiments as I've described them to you. So I'll see you on the boards.